Hundreds of former American soldiers are traveling to Ukraine to fight against Russia. However, this brutal war is unlike any conflict the US military has faced before.
Fighting here, I mean, you're really having to worry about things that you never had to worry about in Iraq and Afghanistan. You're having to worry about drones, airplanes, helicopters. There's enemy tanks and BMPs that are firing at you at pretty much most engagements here.
So what's pulling these people thousands of miles away from home to a war in Ukraine? John, a commander in Ukraine's International Legion, shares his thoughts.
We have representatives from virtually every continent in the world here, which just goes to show you how many people are in support of Ukraine against Russia.
Russia spends billions of dollars trying to discredit both Ukrainian soldiers and American volunteers. It falsely labels the latter as mercenaries and accuses their Ukrainian brothers-in-arms of stealing Western aid. But do the people who have actually been on the battlefield, not just watched it on TV, agree with this narrative?
That I spent almost 2 years here, and I never saw an American Abrams tank disappear due to corruption. I never saw an artillery piece disappear due to corruption. That it's impossible to just put one of those in your pocket and disappear with it to sell it on the black market.
Most of these fighters are US military vets who've seen action in Iraq and Afghanistan. They've served in the world's most powerful army, and now they're putting that experience to work in Ukraine. And here's what they say sets this war apart.
And I think it gets brought up in every single interview, but there weren't drones in Afghanistan. We had drones, we had Predator drones and stuff, but the enemy didn't have drones. And there certainly weren't FPV drones buzzing around, which are the bane of my existence a lot of the times.
Another stark difference is the sheer intensity of this war. The front lines are constantly shifting, and the Russians attack using every type of conventional weaponry in overwhelming quantities. Here's what a former American sniper who fought in Ukraine's International Legion thinks about it.
Yes, Sam, this isn't fighting an insurgency here like it is in Iraq or Afghanistan. It's fighting an actual uniformed army that has an air force, that has a navy, that has artillery support and tanks, armored vehicles, stuff like that.
Smash that like button if you respect the unbreakable determination of American veterans fighting under these extreme conditions. Units made up of American volunteers have been crucial in bolstering Ukraine's combat capabilities. They work on the front lines, side by side with local battalions and brigades. From the very start of the full-scale invasion, they've been part of some of the toughest missions. Take Marine John's first combat operation near Kherson. His group had to cross a river to capture a small settlement. For a Marine, that might sound routine, but for John, it was a whole new challenge.
Our task was to gain a foothold in one of the small village just across this small river. The U.S. Marines are touted as being an amphibious assault. I've never done an amphibious assault. I fought in the desert. I suddenly come over to Ukraine and I'm getting thrown into a Zodiac and told to go do an amphibious assault on a small village, and I'm like, cool.
The river crossing was just the beginning. Russian artillery gave them a brutal welcome.
We actually got pinned down by a lot of our Russian artillery at the time because that was when they had more shells than citizens. And so for about 12 hours we were being shelled, and that was my first time ever being shelled by artillery.
When the shelling stopped, John's group made their move across the river, only to face another challenge.
And then we ended up having to swim out because the boats that we were using got popped. Threw our kit inside of a Zodiac that was half inflated, and we got in the water and we dredged about 1.5 kilometers back up river, and then hiked out for another 1 or 2 kilometers before we got picked up.
The grit and resilience of John's team deserves major respect. Despite every challenge, they pressed on and completed their mission successfully.
Although we got shelled, we actually scared the Russians, and the forces they had forced them to go into this one building, which later that afternoon was struck by a HIMARS, which they had just shown up maybe a month and a half prior to that.
John's group came out of this engagement without any casualties, showcasing a masterclass in professionalism, and the Russians, let's just say their day didn't end well.
I think it was somewhere between 50 and 150 guys were inside that building, they say.
We'll leave the rest to your imagination. The result of this operation? A liberated Kherson. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heroic stories from the Russian-Ukrainian war. The US Army has the planes, missiles, and support to dominate the skies and protect its infantry from unexpected attacks. In this war, however, Russia still holds an advantage in the air over Ukraine. This allows them to drop bombs directly on sectors with Ukrainian troops. Here's how an American soldier recalls his encounter with Russian aircraft.
Bakhmut fighting was very, very interesting. Being attacked by tanks and aircraft, attack helicopters and fixed wing aircraft, stuff like that was something that was just very new, and it just stood out of just how different the warfare is here compared to what I'd previously experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Beyond planes, the Russians have combat drones, something the US never faced in previous conflicts.
Drones, obviously. They have been the biggest change, and it's something that I've seen, like yourself, seen evolve from a single DJI Maverick Pro sitting in the air, freaking, a click away, just zoomed in, and they're just correcting artillery, to now we have FPVs, bomber drones, and we have a flamethrower drone now, which is terrifying.
In just 3 years of full-scale war, drones on both sides have evolved to the point where they can almost replace individual soldiers. Machine gunners, sappers, you name it. 10 years ago, the idea of drones being mass-produced and deployed in such numbers on the battlefield would have seemed like science fiction. Now, it's the reality.
Now we also have ground drones that have guns mounted on them, or they're suicide ground drones that have a TM62 mine inside of it, and they're just ready to roll in and dump into a blindage somewhere.
After arriving in Ukraine, American soldiers found themselves in some of the deadliest battles, where their lives often hung by a thread. This soldier recalls feeling relatively safe and comfortable in Afghanistan. In Ukraine, those feelings vanished within the first days on the front lines.
Because I knew that we had the superiority there. I knew that if I got injured, well, you could count on a UH-60 Blackhawk flying in and medevacing you out if you were in somewhere remote or something bad happens. You are going to get taken back to a relatively safe place with higher medical care. There's absolutely no guarantee of that kind of thing happening in Ukraine.
While stationed in Bakhmut, John's group encountered Wagner mercenaries for the first time.
We had friendly Ukrainian forces in front. We were setting up a secondary line. About an hour into us setting that up, the primary line collapsed. We don't know what happened to them. We don't know if they were all wiped out, if they ran away, if they were over. We just don't know. All we know is headquarters came over the radio and said, "You're the zero line now. The 4 positions in front of you are gone." Okay. Then we got drone confirmation that there were Wagner forces heading towards us.
The Americans quickly took strategic positions and prepared to make the first move.
And in particular, there were about 2 or 3 guys going into this one building that we had interlocking fields of fire on. So every one of us were just like, that building over there? Right. And so I'm behind my machine gun. Everybody else has got their weapons trained on this one building. And we're looking, and one of them popped their heads out.
The Wagner group proved to be a formidable opponent. They had solid equipment, combat experience, and strong motivation to fight. The Russian PMC turned out to be more formidable than the regular armies the Americans had fought in the past.
Even, Marines before me, older Marines, went and cleared areas like Fallujah, for example. They cleared every single room and building of that very large city. That was before I got there. And that was something that was similar to Bakhmut, but the enemy did not have tanks or artillery or aircraft. They had IEDs and some AKs and stuff like that. And it wasn't like a uniform.
If you want to dive deeper into the Wagner Group's brutal tactics and how they lost 20,000 soldiers in Bakhmut, click the link in the top right corner. We've got a video covering their fights with both Ukrainians and American soldiers. Another challenge for American volunteers was that Ukrainian resources were always limited, while the enemy kept up relentless pressure. They had to go into battle with outdated equipment because modern gear was either scarce or entirely unavailable.
That was something that was very interesting to come here and see that almost nobody has night vision capabilities.
Take Marine John, for example. He found himself using a Soviet-era PKM machine gun for the first time. After some quick training, he successfully deployed it in combat.
The PKM got a really good rate of fire. It's really accurate up to, around, I was able to plug targets, like window-sized targets, at about 700, 750 meters. The only real complaint that I have about the PKM is the fact that it doesn't have a disintegrating belt.
As we've mentioned, the most harrowing part of this war is the intensity of the fighting. The enemy has the upper hand in both numbers and firepower. Tragically, this has led to some highly experienced American volunteers being surrounded and captured.
We did manage to evade the enemy, trying to make our way back home on foot for about 8 hours.
With 12 years of combat experience in the US Army, including, Alexander came to Ukraine to help. He was captured and spent 3 grueling months in captivity, losing 31 pounds during that time. We can't discuss the details due to YouTube's policies, but the fact that Alexander Druk survived it all is nothing short of miraculous.
We were put in a lot of stress positions that, honestly, some of those are worse than the punches.
Unfortunately, not every American volunteer is as lucky as Alexander to return home. Some pay the ultimate price in the fight for freedom.
Major task is tracking down wounded foreigners and killed foreigners and making sure they get evacuated home and get treated, or make sure the remains go to the parents or the family members with honor. Because as it stands right now, when an American is wounded or killed, our government's really not doing anything to help.
Former Green Beret David Bramlett is working with a foundation that helps coordinate all these efforts. His mission deserves the highest respect. Ukrainians deeply value the sacrifice of every American soldier and go out of their way to show gratitude to their families. They raised and sent $60,000 to the mother of a fallen American soldier as a gesture of support. Ukrainians understand better than anyone the terrible price of freedom. Because for Russia, the borders of other countries are just arbitrary lines to be crossed at will. Looking at a map, it's clear Russia is much closer to the US than many might think, and they've provoked America multiple times. For American volunteers, fighting in Ukraine is not just about helping an ally. It's about preparing to protect their own homeland from a potential future threat.
It's only a few kilometers, and Russia is known for sending nuclear-capable bombers into our airspace. That, they do this sometimes.
One US Army veteran summed up his motivation to join Ukraine's fight perfectly.
We don't wake up and support the Ukrainians in their hour of need, then we will be on the wrong side of history and we will end up having that fight here, but not with our votes and money. It'll be with tanks and bombs and guns here.
Imagine a T-90 tank rolling through Texas, firing on homes. These American volunteers are doing everything they can to ensure that nightmare never becomes a reality. They aim to stop Russia and empower Ukrainian soldiers, learning invaluable combat lessons in return. So, what do you think? If Russia isn't stopped in Ukraine, how soon will they set their sights on the US? A year? 3 years? Maybe 10? Share your thoughts in the comments.